Hello, my name is Paige, and this week I'll be focusing on the topic of reporting within interventions. So, as we have read about and learned through the entire semester, disclosure and reporting disclosure is an integral part to helping kids who are facing abuse and neglect. So, as I was reading the textbook over this topic, I took interest in the role that police officers played within the reporting aspect of child abuse because the book says that they're an important part. Of the intervention process. So, one of the reasons being this is that police officers are easily identified by kids, so they all have this idea or know what they look like. And then children are typically taught to think that police officers are protectors and that they can be trusted adults. So, a connection I actually made with the article that I chose this week and just like this topic in general was from our book review book. I chose to read a child called It. And in the beginning of this book, David, who's the main character of the book and also the author, describes his experiences with abuse and kind of like a spoiler alert, his mom physically abuses him, and at one point he gets stabbed by her, and there's more details that you need to know so you can read the book, but there's like a scar from where he was stabbed. And so in the book, David's principal at his school ends up calling the police officer to come in and interview David, and David is being really reluctant during the interview. And even when there's proof, so even when they ask him about the scar, David tries to cover up the abuse and say it was an accident. And so his mind is kind of misconstrued by the abuse, and I thought that this kind of went well with the article that I chose for this week because it's about how children of sexual abuse cases and physical abuse cases report their abuse. So it's just taking a look at that. So the article that I chose talks about how child victims involved in like legal proceedings gets tricky because there's this concern that children's memories and their testimonies are going to be confused. So children are expected, especially when speaking with like legal figures, to provide accurate and complete accounts of their experiences, but that's not always the case. And sometimes the testimony is all that officials have to go off of. So whatever they say is very crucial to the case. It's important that they are getting accurate information. So a common trait found with victims of sexual abuse is the failure to disclose, and we've kind of read about that. Studies have shown where there's evidence of sexual abuse, such as videos and pictures, like from the perpetrator, the victim's reports are usually incomplete and missing, and they don't usually disclose all information until follow-up interviews. So after the initial interview, they're more willing to give more details, but it's not always in that first interview. So there needs to be more research done on how to get more like a specific representation of patterns in the reports. But also a common trait with victims of physical abuse, which is kind of interesting, is that most of these children are willing to provide details about the physical abuse that they've encountered or that they've witnessed because kind of based on the idea that children are taught at a young age that physically harming someone and physical abuse is not right. And so whenever they experience that or see it, it's more of like a normal expectation for them to tell on that person. And it's not something they're ashamed to share most of the time. So the main aim of this study that I found in the article was to compare the reporting patterns of sexually abused children with those of children who have been physically abused. It focused most of the patterns on reporting critical abuse-related information. So based on previous studies where sexually abused children are expected to be affected by embarrassment and social taboo of society, this study also expected that sexually abused children were going to be more reluctant to share more of that critical abuse-related information than physically abused children. So there are 45 total cases. 22 of these children were sexual abuse victims, and then 23 were physically abused victims. All of the cases were verified, so the perpetrator in each case was guilty and convicted. Um, and there was a certain way that these people went about conducting the study. So the first part of the study was gathering background information on each of the child victims. So this included getting their age, their sex, the type of abuse that they've encountered, the frequency of the abuse, and their relationship to the perpetrator. So basic information that's crucial to each specific case. And then the second part of coding was the child's reports of abuse were put into different categories. So there's 6 different categories. The first category is before the assault. So whenever a child is sharing information, this would be anything that happened up to the point of the assault. So they could say, I was watching TV. The second category is during the assault, and this is sexual information or information about severe violence. The third category is also during the assault, but focuses on sensitive information and details about less severe violence. So this would say, he took my clothes off, versus the second category where this was more severe, saying like they kicked me or this is where they touched me. The fourth category is also during the assault, but this is neutral information. So information that's important, but also not giving away critical parts of the case. So saying I was wearing a yellow t-shirt. The fifth category is after the assault. So saying after the abuse, we went to the store and got ice cream. And then the sixth category is a description of the child's own thoughts and feelings during the abuse. So them describing how they're feeling when this is all occurring. So then the third part of the study, before getting the results, focuses on the children's denials and expressions of avoidance. So this can be an omission or avoidance involving failing to like respond information, saying like I don't know, or omitting a response, which is just no answer, changing the subject, expressions of unwillingness to report, saying that they don't want to tell. And then there's also denials that involved claims from the child that an event or interaction didn't happen when there's proof that it did. So that was all prior to getting the results. So then the results show that during the interview, all 45 children of both physical and sexual abuse reported a total of 2,042 details, which is a lot. But those are just details that fall into those 6 categories. So none of the children denied the abuse altogether, although 40% denied parts of the abuse, and then 84% of the children had withheld some information regarding verified acts of sexual or physical abuse. So stuff that was proven to be true. Physically abused children reported more severe information about the abuse than sexually abused children. And it's also important to understand that abuse-related information is the most important information in the investigation, and usually the most important information to share in a testimony. So one explanation for this is that the children's tendency to report more neutral than critical abuse-related information deals with the feelings of shame and guilt. So simply because they're ashamed of what had happened or they're guilty from the incident. Physically abused children had reported more information about physical abuse than sexually abused children did about sexual abuse. And then based on gender, the study also showed that boys reported more information about severe abuse and about the event in general than the girls did, which is kind of interesting because in a lot of cases, boys are not as likely to share information about sexual abuse, so it's kind of interesting to see that they were reported to share the most information. One thing this study kind of focuses on towards the end is how important it is not to kind of generalize children into this one study, because there were only 45 children that were a part of this study, which isn't, it's a lot of children, but not a lot compared to how many are physically abused and sexually abused around the world. So this was kind of like a starting point for a good topic to go off of, and they're kind of just seeing if this information would be useful to other people as well. One strong aspect of the study is that the sample was independent because the investigations were done from different police authorities that were scattered throughout the country, and they had like randomly distributed case characteristics. So the cases were similar, like in the idea that they're either sexual abuse cases or physical abuse cases, but the details within them were unique to that person and that incident. So knowing this information from the study kind of is, like I said, something to go off of. And it's kind of useful. It's supposed to be used in a legal setting, so just to be used to help us better understand how we can conduct more effective child interviews and how to create the best possible conditions for a complete and accurate testimony from a child. So that is information about the article and the chapter and also my connection for my book. I hope you guys found this interesting. And yeah, there's some questions for you to think about on Blackboard to answer. So